In the most sacred moment of a woman's life, when she should have been living her dream of eternal love, Sophie discovered the cruelest truth one can hear, but her revenge would change everything forever. The mirror reflected a radiant bride. Sophie adjusted the veil for the 10th time, her hands trembling slightly, not from nervousness, but from pure happiness. After a 5-year relationship, the day had finally arrived when she would become the wife of Jaden Kumar, the man she had met at NUS, and who had won over not only her heart, but her entire family. "You look beautiful, my dear," whispered Eleanor, her mother, as she adjusted the pearl necklace that had belonged to Sophie's grandmother. "Jaden is a lucky man," Sophie smiled, feeling her heart race. In a few minutes, she would walk down the aisle of Chimes Hall, towards the altar, where Jaden was waiting. Everything was perfect. The dream dress, the hand-picked flowers, the guests arriving, the soft music echoing through the sacred space. "I just need to use the restroom quickly before the ceremony starts," Sophie told her mother. "Can you check if everything's all right with the bridesmaids?" Eleanor nodded and left the small bridal suite attached to the hall where Sophie was getting ready. Alone, she took a deep breath, looking one last time in the mirror. "This is the happiest day of my life," she murmured to herself. That was when she heard male voices coming from the side garden of the hall. She immediately recognized Jaden's laugh. Curious, and with a smile on her lips, she approached the slightly open window, imagining he was nervously chatting with his groomsmen. What she heard next destroyed her world in seconds. "Bro, are you sure you want to go through with this?" It was the voice of Alvin, Jaden's best friend since childhood. "Marrying for self-interest won't work out forever." Jaden laughed, but it was a bitter laugh Sophie had never heard before. "Alvin, I tried to really love her, but I can't. Sophie is, I don't know, too simple for me, too naive." Sophie felt as if a dagger had pierced her chest. Her legs began to tremble. "So, why are you doing this, man?" asked another groomsman, Ben. "You know her father, Dr. Tanwei Xiong. The man owns Azure Pacific Healthcare Group, the most prosperous in the city. Sophie will inherit all of it one day," Jaden said with a coldness that made Sophie's blood run cold. "Besides, she loves me so much, she does whatever I want. It's convenient." "But what about Cheryl?" Alvin asked quietly. Sophie's heart stopped. "Cheryl? Who was Cheryl?" "Cheryl is the woman I really love," Jaden confessed, and his words sounded like a death sentence to the bride's ears. "Always has been, but she has no money, no influential family. Sophie has all of that. I'll get married, secure my future, and continue with Cheryl discreetly." "That's very heavy, Jaden," Ben murmured, clearly uncomfortable. "It's real life, Ben. Sophie will never suspect a thing. She idolizes me too much, and when I inherit part of my father-in-law's business, I'll have total freedom." Jaden laughed again. The best of both worlds, financial security with Sophie and true love with Cheryl. Sophie staggered away from the window, her legs barely able to support her. The white dress that minutes before had represented purity and happiness now felt like a shroud. Tears began to stream down her face, smudging her carefully applied makeup. 5 years. 5 years of her life dedicated to a man who saw her only as an investment. All the declarations of love, all the plans for the future, all the promises whispered on romantic nights, all lies. Her hands trembled so much she could barely hold the bouquet. The scent of the white roses, which had previously brought her joy, now made her nauseous. How had she been so blind? How had she not noticed the signs? She remembered the times Jaden cancelled dates at the last minute, the strange phone calls he took in another room, the way he avoided talking about the future in detail. It all made sense now, the work meetings that stretched late into the night, the business trips that came out of nowhere, the weekends he said he needed to be alone to think about life. The door opened and Eleanor entered, beaming. "Sophie, darling, it's time. The groomsmen are already in position." "Oh my goodness, what happened? Are you crying?" Sophie quickly wiped her tears, trying to fix her makeup. "It's nothing, Mum. Tears of happiness." But inside, a devastating storm was brewing. The naive, infatuated Sophie had died in those few minutes. In her place emerged a woman who had discovered the cruelest truth at the most sacred moment of her life. "Are you sure you're okay? We can delay for a few minutes if you need to touch up," Eleanor offered, concerned about her daughter's state. Sophie took a deep breath, looking at herself in the mirror once more. An idea began to form in her mind. Jaden thought she was too naive to discover his lies, that she would do whatever he wanted without question, that she would be just a convenient wife while he lived his great love with another. He was about to find out how wrong he was. "No, Mum, I'm perfect," Sophie said, Her voice now carried a cold determination that Eleanor herself found strange. "Let's go ahead. This wedding is going to be unforgettable." For the first time in her life, Sophie felt a pure, crystalline anger running through her veins. It wasn't just betrayal, it was complete humiliation. Jayden had turned her into a joke for his friends, a business opportunity, a means to his financial ends. The doors of the hall opened, and the chords of the wedding march echoed through the sacred space. Sophie began to walk down the aisle, her veil flowing behind her like the wings of an avenging angel. The guests stood, all admiring her radiant beauty, but Sophie saw nothing but the man waiting for her at the altar. Jayden was smiling, playing the part of the devoted groom perfectly. His impeccable tuxedo, his clean-shaven face, his eyes shining with false emotion, everything about him was a carefully constructed lie. Dr. Tan Wei-xiong, her father, held her arm with pride, whispering words of affection that she could barely hear. Her ears were ringing with the cruel words she had heard minutes before. "It's convenient. She idolizes me. She'll never suspect." Each step towards the altar was a decision. Sophie could stop right there, reveal everything in front of all the guests, create a scandal that would destroy not only Jayden, but also her own reputation and her family's. Or she could be smarter. She reached the altar and her father gave her hand to Jayden, who took it with a false gentleness she now recognized. "You look beautiful," he murmured just for her to hear. "Thank you," Sophie replied. Her voice was soft, as always, but her eyes carried something Jayden couldn't interpret. The solemnizer began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in this sacred place to celebrate the union of Sophie and Jayden in matrimony." Sophie heard every word as if in a trance. Beside her, Jayden maintained the perfect posture, smiling at the guests, playing the happy groom. But she knew the truth. She knew that behind that smile was a calculating man who saw her only as a stepping stone to get ahead in life. "If anyone knows of any impediment why this union should not take place, speak now or forever. Hold your peace," the solemnizer declared. Complete silence in the hall. Sophie felt all eyes on her and Jayden. This was the moment. She could speak, she could expose everything right there, but she didn't because she had something much better in store for Jayden, something he would never expect from his convenient and naive bride. "Jayden, do you take Sophie to be your lawful wedded wife, to love and to respect, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Jayden answered with conviction, looking into Sophie's eyes with a falseness that made her feel nauseous. "Sophie, do you take Jayden to be your lawful wedded husband, to love and to respect, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Sophie looked deeply into Jayden's eyes. For a moment, she saw in them not the man who had loved her for 5 years, but the stranger who had betrayed her in the most cowardly way possible. A man who was willing to live a lie for the rest of his life, using her as a ladder to success. "I do," she said, her voice firm and clear, but in her mind, she completed the sentence very differently. "I accept that you underestimated me. I accept that you made the biggest mistake of your life, and I accept that you will pay for it in a way you never imagined." The rings were exchanged, the kiss was given, applause echoed through the hall. Officially, Sophie and Jayden were husband and wife. But while Jayden was internally celebrating having secured his financial future, Sophie was already planning how she would completely destroy the life of the man who dared to play with her heart. The party had barely begun, and Jayden had no idea of the storm that was about to break over him. The wedding reception was stunning. The grand ballroom of the Fullerton Hotel glittered with hundreds of golden lights. White flowers adorned every table, and guests celebrated with champagne and radiant smiles. Everything had been planned to the smallest detail by Sophie for months. Ironically, to celebrate what she now knew to be the biggest sham of her life, Sophie greeted the guests with a perfect smile, receiving congratulations and warm hugs from family and friends. On the outside, she was the happiest bride in the world. On the inside, every word of felicitation was like salt in an open wound. "Sophie, darling, what a beautiful wedding," exclaimed Auntie Susan, one of her mother's sisters. "Jayden is truly a special man. You make a perfect couple." "Thank you, Auntie," Sophie replied, maintaining her rehearsed smile. "We're very happy." But her eyes were constantly searching for Jayden across the ballroom. He was on the other side, talking animatedly with a group of friends, laughing loudly, perfectly playing the part of the happy and fulfilled newlywed husband. How could he act so naturally after what she had discovered? "My dear, you don't seem to be enjoying your own party," Dr. Tan Wei-xiong approached, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Is everything all right?" Sophie accepted the glass, forcing a more genuine smile for her father. "Everything's fine, Dad. It's a lot of emotion, you know. 5 years of dating and now we're married. I can hardly believe it." "Jayden is a good lad," Dr. Tan said, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "He'll take good care of you, and I'm sure you'll build a beautiful family together." Family? The word hit Sophie like a punch to the gut. How many times had she and Jayden talked about having children? How many times had he said he wanted a house full of kids with her? All lies. All calculated to keep the sham going. "Dad, can I ask you a question?" Sophie said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "Of course, my dear. Anything. Have you ever suspected anything strange about Jayden's behavior? Anything that seemed out of place?" Dr. Tan frowned, clearly surprised by the question. "Why are you asking, Sophie? Did something happen?" Sophie shook her head quickly. No, just curious. You know how I am, always overanalyzing everything." "Jayden has always seemed very devoted to you," Dr. Tan replied thoughtfully. "Although, now that you mention it, he has shown a lot of interest in the family business lately, always asking about Azure Pacific, about expansions, investments." Sophie's blood boiled. Even her father had noticed Jayden's suspicious interest in the family business. "But that's natural," Dr. Tan continued. "After all, he's part of the family now. It's normal for him to want to be more involved." Natural. If only her father knew the truth behind this natural interest. "Sophie, there you are." The cheerful voice of Rachel Chan, her best friend since secondary school, interrupted the conversation. "I need to steal the bride for some photos." Dr. Tan smiled and walked away, leaving the two friends alone. "Rachel, I need to tell you something," Sophie whispered, pulling her friend to a more private corner of the ballroom. "What is it?" "You've had a strange look on your face since you left the hall," Rachel noted immediately. "Did something happen?" Sophie took a deep breath. Rachel was the only person in the world she trusted completely. If she was going to tell anyone, it would be her. "I found out something terrible about Jayden," Sophie began, her voice trembling. "Minutes before the ceremony, I heard him talking to Alvin and Ben in the garden." "What did he say?" "That he doesn't love me. That he's only with me for my family's money, and that he has a mistress named Cheryl." The color drained from Rachel's face. "Sophie, are you sure about what you heard? Maybe it was a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Rach. I heard every word. He said I'm convenient, that I'll never suspect because I idolize him too much, and that when he inherits part of Dad's business, he'll have total freedom to live with this Cheryl." Tears began to well up in Rachel's eyes. "Oh my God, Sophie, why didn't you call off the wedding? Why did you go through with it?" Sophie discreetly wiped away a tear that insisted on escaping. "Because I have a plan, Rach. Jayden thinks he knows me, but he has no idea who I really am when I'm betrayed." "Sophie, whatever you're thinking, don't do anything rash," Rachel warned, holding her friend's hands. "Revenge is never the solution. It's not revenge, Rach. It's justice." At that moment, Jayden approached the corner where the two were talking, his smile radiant as always. "There are the two most beautiful women at the party," he said, wrapping his arm around Sophie's waist with an intimacy that now made her feel repulsed. "Rachel, thank you for being such a special friend to my wife." "My wife." The words came out of his mouth with a terrifying naturalness. "Jayden," Rachel replied coolly, a tone he failed to notice. "Love, your mother is looking for you for the official photos," Jayden said to Sophie. "After that, we need to talk about our honeymoon. I have a surprise for you." "Surprise?" Sophie almost laughed at the irony. The only surprise here was that she had discovered who he really was. "Of course, darling," Sophie replied, giving him a kiss on the cheek that required all her willpower not to feel disgusted. "I'm on my way." Jayden moved away to greet other guests, and Rachel gripped Sophie's arm tightly. "Sophie, I'm scared of what you might do," Rachel whispered. "Promise me you won't do anything crazy." Sophie looked directly into her best friend's eyes. "Rach, you've known me for 15 years. Have I ever done anything without thinking about the consequences? No, but then trust me, Jayden messed with the wrong woman." The official photos began. Sophie posed beside her husband, smiling for the cameras, portraying perfect happiness. But each click was a reminder of the farce her life had become. During a break, she watched Jayden talking with Alvin and Ben near the bar. The three of them were laughing loudly, probably celebrating the success of Jayden's plan. The anger Sophie felt was almost uncontrollable. It was then that she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A woman with long, dark hair, elegantly dressed, had discreetly entered the ballroom. She wasn't on the guest list. Sophie knew every single person who had been invited. The woman was looking for someone, and when her eyes found Jayden, a subtle smile appeared on her face. Cheryl. Sophie knew instinctively that this was the woman who had destroyed her marriage before it had even begun, and she had come to the party. The audacity was breathtaking. Jayden noticed her presence, and for a fraction of a second, Sophie saw a look of panic cross his face. He said something quickly to Alvin and Ben, and discreetly made his way towards Cheryl. Sophie watched them from afar as they spoke near the ballroom entrance. The conversation seemed tense. Cheryl was gesticulating angrily, and Jayden was trying to calm her down. At one point, she saw Jayden discreetly take Cheryl's phone and type something in, probably his number. The situation was surreal. Here she was at her own wedding reception, watching her husband exchange details with his mistress. "Sophie, darling, time for the toast," Eleanor called from the other side of the ballroom. Sophie instantly composed herself, walking towards the main table where Jayden was already waiting with a glass in his hand. He had returned quickly, as if nothing had happened. "Dear friends and family," Jayden began his speech, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "This is the happiest day of my life. Sophie is not just my wife. She is my soulmate, my best friend, my partner for life." The guests applauded emotionally. Some people were wiping tears from their eyes, touched by the romantic declaration. Sophie felt like she was going to be sick. "Sophie has made me a better man," Jayden continued, looking directly at her with eyes that shone with falsehood. "With her, I discovered what true love is. I promised to care for her, protect her, and love her forever." More applause, more tears of emotion from the guests. Sophie raised her glass, the smile plastered on her face. "Jayden," she began, her voice soft but carrying an edge that only she and Rachel could identify. "You truly surprised me today. You showed who you really are in a way I never imagined possible." Jayden smiled, thinking she was complimenting him. "And I promise," Sophie continued, her eyes fixed on his, "that our life together will be exactly what you deserve." The guests erupted in applause, interpreting her words as a beautiful declaration of love. But Jayden should have paid more attention to her tone. He should have noticed the dangerous glint in her eyes. He should have realized that Sophie was no longer the naive woman he thought he knew, because the war had only just begun. The trip to the resort in Bintan had been a wedding gift from Sophie's parents. A paradise with private villas surrounded by lush nature, where the newlyweds would spend 2 weeks, supposedly living the best days of their lives. For Sophie, those would be 2 weeks of pure hell disguised as paradise. On the first day, while Jayden explored the resort's facilities, Sophie took advantage of the privacy to cry all the tears she had held back during the ceremony and reception. Sitting on the villa's balcony, overlooking the sea, she finally allowed all the pain to pour out. 5 years thrown away, 5 years loving a ghost, 5 years building dreams with someone who saw her only as a lucrative investment. But on the second day, something changed. Sophie dried her tears, looked at herself in the mirror, and made a decision that would change everything. Jayden wanted to play a game, so she would play too, but by her own rules. "Love, you seem different today," Jayden commented during breakfast, noticing Sophie was quieter than usual. "Is everything okay?" "I'm great, darling," Sophie replied, forcing a smile. "Just a bit tired from the party. It was a lot of emotion yesterday." "I told you I had a surprise for our honeymoon," Jayden said, his eyes shining with an excitement Sophie now recognized as pure deceit. "How about we go for a walk around the local town today? I know some amazing places." "Amazing places?" Sophie almost laughed at the irony. Probably places he had been with Cheryl. "Of course, that sounds wonderful," she replied. But while Jayden was getting ready for the outing, Sophie did something she had never done before. She went through his phone. It wasn't hard to guess the passcode. It was her birthday, which made everything even more cruel and ironic. Sophie navigated through the messages with a racing heart, looking for anything that would confirm her suspicions, and she found entire conversations with Cheryl. Passionate love messages exchanged while Jayden was planning the wedding with Sophie. Personal photos sent the day before the ceremony, detailed plans of how they would get together after the marriage was a done deal. But the message that destroyed her the most was one sent in the early hours after the reception. "Jayden, mission accomplished, my beautiful. Now just have to wait until I'm settled in the father-in-law's business, and we can be together officially. Cheryl. Sophie will never find out anything. I miss you. When are you back from the fake honeymoon?" "Jayden, 2 weeks, but it will be worth it. In a few months, I'll have full access to her family's money." Sophie sat on the bed, trembling with rage. Fake honeymoon, that's how he referred to the most important days of her life. "Sophie, are you ready?" Jayden called from the bathroom. "Coming," she replied quickly, copying some important phone numbers from his phone, including Cheryl's. During the walk through the town, Jayden made an effort to be the attentive, romantic husband. He bought Sophie flowers, took photos of the two of them at scenic spots, held her hand affectionately through the cobbled streets. But Sophie was mentally elsewhere. With every romantic gesture from him, she planned her next move. "Jayden, can I ask you a question?" she said while they were having lunch at a restaurant with a panoramic view. "Of course, love. Anything." "Do you feel professionally fulfilled?" Jayden nearly choked on his food. "Why are you asking that?" "Well, I was thinking, now that we're married, maybe my father could give you a better opportunity at the company. A higher position, with more responsibility." Jayden's eyes lit up in a way that made Sophie's stomach turn. "Really? You'd do that for me?" "Of course, darling. After all, we're a family now. Your success is my success too." Jayden held her hand across the table, his excitement barely concealed. "Sophie, you have no idea how much this means to me. I've always dreamed of working directly with your father. Dreamed as if it were a noble aspiration and not a calculated plan to seize the family fortune. Then it's decided. When we get back, I'll talk to Dad," Sophie said, watching his face light up completely. That night, back at the villa, Sophie pretended to be asleep while watching Jayden from the corner of her eye. He was on the terrace, talking softly on his phone, probably with Cheryl, reporting the progress of his mission. On the third day, Sophie put the second phase of her plan into action. "Darling, I need to pop back to Singapore to sort out some banking matters," she said during breakfast. "Things with my grandma's estate, you know how it is. Want me to come with you?" Jayden offered, but Sophie could tell he was eager to be alone, probably to talk to Cheryl without being interrupted. "No need, love. It's just boring bank stuff. You can enjoy the day and relax by the pool." Sophie took the ferry back to Singapore, but she didn't go to the bank. She went straight to a law firm in Raffles Place and sought out a lawyer specializing in matrimonial law. Mr. Jeyaratnam was a middle-aged man with decades of experience in divorce and marital misconduct cases. Sophie entered his office determined, though still nervous. "Mrs. Kumar, how can I help you?" Mr. Jeyaratnam asked, noticing the still shining wedding band on her finger. "Mr. Jeyaratnam, I got married 3 days ago, and I've discovered that my husband only married me for financial gain. He has a mistress and plans to use me to access my family's assets." Mr. Jeyaratnam frowned. "I see. And do you have proof of this?" Sophie showed him the photos she had taken of the conversations on Jayden's phone. Mr. Jeyaratnam read everything with growing attention. "This is quite serious, Mrs. Kumar. It constitutes fraudulent misrepresentation. But tell me, why didn't you call off the wedding when you found out?" Sophie took a deep breath. "Because I want him to pay for humiliating me like this. I want him to lose everything, just like I did. I understand your indignation, but revenge is not something I can legally advise. It's not revenge, Mr. Jeyaratnam, it's justice. He committed a crime against me. Fraud, as you said yourself." Mr. Jeyaratnam nodded slowly. "You have a point. Legally, we have a solid case, but I must warn you. A process like this can be very emotionally draining. More draining than discovering my entire marriage is a lie? Touché. Very well, let's discuss the options." 2 hours later, Sophie left the office with a detailed plan. Mr. Jeyaratnam had explained exactly how to proceed to protect her assets and expose Jayden legally. When she returned to the resort, she found Jayden by the pool, exactly as she had imagined. He was on the phone, laughing and talking in an intimate tone. "Hi, love," Sophie called from the other side of the pool, making Jayden jump and quickly hang up the phone. "Hi, darling. How did things go at the bank?" "All sorted. Did you enjoy your day?" "Yes, relaxed a lot." Jayden lied shamelessly. That evening, during dinner, Sophie decided to test just how far Jayden's farce would go. "Darling, I have a confession to make," she said, putting on a serious expression. Jayden nearly dropped his wine glass. "What confession?" I never told you, but I've always had insecurities about our relationship." "Insecurities? Why?" "Sometimes I wonder if you really love me, or if you're with me for other reasons." The color drained from Jayden's face. "Sophie, how can you think such a thing? Of course I love you. You're the woman of my life." The ease with which he lied was astounding. Sophie almost felt sorry for him. "I know, darling. Sorry for doubting you. It's just that sometimes we get insecure, don't we?" "Sophie, look into my eyes," Jayden said, holding her hands across the table. "I love you more than anything in this life. I would never do anything to hurt you. Every word was like a stab to Sophie's heart. How could someone lie with such conviction? "I love you too, Jayden," she replied, forcing tears into her eyes. "So much." Jayden smiled, clearly relieved to have convinced his wife of his sincerity. But he had no idea that Sophie was recording the entire conversation with an app on her phone, more evidence for the lawsuit that would change his life forever. In the last week of the honeymoon, Sophie had everything she needed: proof of the affair, recorded conversations, an experienced lawyer, and a detailed plan to destroy the man who had played with her heart. Jayden continued to play the role of the devoted husband, never suspecting that every lie he told was being carefully documented. "Sophie, these have been the best days of my life," he said on their last night, holding her on the villa's balcony. "Mine too," Sophie replied. And for the first time since the wedding, she wasn't completely lying, because those had been the days she had discovered her own strength, her ability to plan, her determination not to be humiliated without a fight. Jayden had created a monster, and he didn't even know it. The return from the honeymoon marked the beginning of the most dangerous phase of Sophie's plan. They arrived home on a sunny afternoon, and Jayden immediately began to act as if he owned the place. He rearranged some furniture, commented on improvements that could be made, and even suggested they throw a party for friends to celebrate their new home. Sophie observed his every move with a mixture of disgust and fascination. His audacity had no limits. "Love, I already called your father," Jayden announced on the second day, while having a coffee. "I've scheduled a lunch to talk about my position at the company." "That's great, darling," Sophie replied, chewing her toast slowly. "I'm sure you two will get along perfectly." Jayden didn't notice the sarcastic tone behind the affectionate words. That same morning, while Jayden was in the shower, Sophie received a call that would change everything. "Mrs. Kumar, it's Mr. Jeyaratnam." The lawyer's voice sounded serious over the phone. "I have important news about your case." Sophie quickly went out to the garden, making sure Jayden couldn't hear her. "What did you find out, Mr. Jeyaratnam?" "My private investigator found some very interesting information about your husband and this Cheryl Lim. They've known each other for much longer than you imagine." Sophie's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "They were dating before you met Jayden at NUS. Their relationship never truly ended. He always maintained contact with her, even during the 5 years you were together." Sophie felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. 5 whole years of betrayal. It hadn't just been financial interest. It had been a complete sham from day one. "Mr. Jeyaratnam, does this mean that my marriage was planned from the beginning?" "Yes. Jayden approached you deliberately, probably after finding out who your father was and your family's financial situation." Sophie had to lean against the garden wall to keep from falling. The cruelty of the situation was even worse than she had imagined. She had never had a real chance of being loved by Jayden. Everything had been calculated, premeditated, staged. "Mrs. Kumar, are you there?" "Yes, I'm here, Mr. Jeyaratnam. Sorry, it's just a lot to process." "I understand completely, but there's more. Cheryl works for a financial consulting firm. She has access to privileged information about family-owned businesses. It's highly likely she helped Jayden plan this entire strategy." Sophie closed her eyes, feeling an anger so intense her vision blurred. It wasn't just Jayden. It was a conspiracy by 2 people to destroy her life and seize her family's fortune. "What do we do now, Mr. Jeyaratnam?" "Now we begin phase 2. I'll need you to be very careful from here on out. Jayden cannot suspect anything until we are ready to act." "Don't worry. He thinks I'm too naive to suspect anything." "Excellent. Use that to your advantage. The more secure he feels, the more evidence he will give us." When Sophie went back inside, Jayden was in the living room on his laptop. "Who were you talking to in the garden?" he asked casually. But Sophie noticed he had stopped typing to listen to her answer. "With Rachel." She wanted to know how the honeymoon was. Sophie lied with a naturalness that surprised her. "Oh, that's nice. And what did you tell her?" "That they were the best days of my life, next to the man I love," Sophie replied, looking directly into his eyes. Jayden smiled, clearly pleased with the answer. "You're perfect, you know that? Perfect for your plans," Sophie thought. That afternoon, Jayden went out to meet some friends, probably Cheryl, and Sophie took the opportunity to implement the next stage of her strategy. She called Dr. Tanwei Xiong at his office. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something very important. Can it be today?" "Of course, my dear. Did something happen? You sound worried." "It's about Jayden and his position at the company. I have some ideas I'd like to discuss in person." An hour later, Sophie was in her father's imposing office on the top floor of the Azure Pacific Healthcare building. The walls, covered with diplomas and awards, reminded everyone that Dr. Tan had built his empire through decades of hard work and dedication. "Dad, Jayden is going to approach you to talk about a better position in the company," Sophie began, choosing her words carefully. "Yes, he already called. Seemed quite enthusiastic," Dr. Tan replied. "I'm thinking of offering him a role in the administrative department. Nothing too high level initially, of course." "Actually, Dad, I had a different idea." Dr. Tan raised his eyebrows, interested. "What if we offer him full access to the company's financial reports? Let him analyze our investments, our expansion strategy, our most important contracts." "Sophie, that's very sensitive information. Why do you want to give Jayden so much access right away?" Sophie took a deep breath. "Because I want to see what he does with that information. I want to test if he truly has the family's best interests at heart." Dr. Tan studied his daughter's face for a few seconds. "Sophie, is there something going on that I need to know about?" "Dad, just give me this chance. If in 3 months Jayden proves he deserves our complete trust, then we'll know he's really part of the family. But if he does something suspicious with that information, then we'll know what kind of man he really is." Dr. Tan completed, understanding perfectly where his daughter was going. "Exactly." Dr. Tan nodded slowly. "Very well. I'll prepare a test. Jayden will have access to important information, but I'll also set some traps. If he tries to misuse what he finds, we'll know immediately." Sophie smiled for the first time in days. "Thank you, Dad. You won't regret it." When Sophie got home, Jayden had already returned from his meeting with friends. He was unusually cheerful, humming as he made a snack in the kitchen. "Hi, love. How was your day?" he asked, giving her a kiss on the cheek. "Productive. And yours?" "Also. Met up with Alvin and Ben, told them about my upcoming chat with your dad. They were pretty excited about my prospects at the company." "Prospects?" Sophie nearly laughed at the irony. "By the way," Jayden continued, "your dad called a little while ago. We've set the lunch for tomorrow. He seemed very receptive to the idea of giving me more responsibility." "That's wonderful, darling. I'm sure you two will get along perfectly." As usual, he was on the phone, talking softly, but this time she managed to catch a few words. "Going to be easier than we thought. Full access to the files. In a few months, we'll have everything we need." Sophie closed her eyes, feeling a mix of sadness and determination. Jayden was literally planning to rob her family and still had the audacity to sleep beside her every night as if he were a loving husband. The next day, Jayden dressed with special care for his lunch with Dr. Tan. Expensive tie, impeccable suit, shiny shoes. He was clearly nervous but tried to hide it. "Wish me luck," he said to Sophie before leaving. "Good luck, darling. I'm sure you'll get exactly what you deserve." 3 hours later, Jayden returned home, beaming. "Sophie, it was better than I ever imagined," he shouted as he walked in. "Your dad offered me access to the most important financial reports of the company. I'll be able to analyze investments, expansion strategies, everything." "Really? That's incredible, love." Sophie feigned surprise and joy. "Dad must really trust you." "I knew he'd eventually see my potential," Jayden said, hugging Sophie and spinning her around the living room. "In a few months, I'll know this company better than anyone." "Better than anyone." The words echoed in Sophie's mind like a funeral bell. "When do you start?" "Monday. Your dad said he's giving me my own office and access to the internal systems." Sophie smiled, but inside, she was celebrating for completely different reasons. Jayden had just walked into the most perfect trap she and her father could have set. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered in his ear, and for the first time since discovering the betrayal, Sophie was genuinely happy, because she knew Jayden had just signed his own professional and personal ruin. The war had officially begun, and he had no idea he had already lost. The first few weeks of Jayden's new position were a comedy of errors that Sophie observed from a distance, with a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. He came home every day talking about the important deals he was analyzing, the strategic investments he was studying, and the growth opportunities he had identified. What he didn't know was that every document he accessed, every file he copied, every report he discreetly photographed with his phone was being monitored by the most advanced security systems money could buy. "Sophie, you have no idea the scale of your father's business," Jayden commented during dinner one Thursday, his eyes shining with poorly disguised greed. "Azure Pacific has multi-million-dollar government contracts, international partnerships, investments in sectors I never even imagined." "How interesting." "Darling," Sophie replied, delicately cutting the meat on her plate. "Dad has always been very private about the details of the business. It's good to know he trusts you enough to share this information." "Exactly. And the best part is, he said I can take some analyses home to study more closely over the weekends. Sophie nearly choked on her food. Jayden was literally confessing to stealing confidential information from her family's company. His audacity knew no bounds. "Wow, you're so dedicated," she managed to say, maintaining an admiring tone. "I'm sure Dad will be impressed with your commitment." That same night, after Jayden had fallen asleep, Sophie discreetly checked his briefcase. She found 3 USB drives hidden in the lining, along with several printed sheets containing information about the company's offshore bank accounts and confidential contracts with international suppliers. She photographed everything with her phone and immediately sent it to Mr. Jeyaratnam. The reply came a few minutes later. "Mrs. Kumar, this is gold. Your husband is committing crimes that could result in decades of imprisonment. We are ready for the next phase." Sophie felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because she finally had irrefutable proof of Jayden's true nature. Sadness because it meant that any small hope she had that she might have been wrong about him had vanished forever. The following Friday, Sophie put the riskiest phase of her plan into action. During lunch, she called Jayden at his office. "Hi, love. Everything okay at work?" "Everything's great, darling. I'm analyzing some very interesting contracts." "That's good. Listen, I'm calling because I received a strange proposal this morning." "What proposal?" Sophie took a deep breath. "A woman called the house asking if I was interested in selling information about Dad's company to competitors." Total silence on the other end of the line. "Jayden, are you there?" Yes. Sorry. It's just, that's very serious, Sophie. Corporate espionage is a crime." "I know. That's why I refused immediately. But it got me thinking, could someone close to the family be leaking information? Dad has always been so careful with the company's security." "No, I don't know, love. I think it's unlikely. Your dad only trusts people very close to him." "That's true. Well, I'll tell him about this call when he gets home tonight. It's better he knows people are trying to buy information about the company." "Wait, Sophie," Jayden said quickly. "How about you don't tell him anything for now? I can investigate this discreetly from the office. If there really is someone leaking information, it's better we find out who it is before alarming your father." Sophie smiled. Jayden had just dug his own grave. "You think so? I don't know. Dad will be furious if he finds out we hid this from him. Trust me, love. In a week, I'll figure everything out, and then we can tell him with a solution in hand. It'll be much better that way." "All right, if you think that's best." "I'm sure of it. And Sophie?" "Yes? Don't mention this to anyone else, okay? Not even Rachel. The fewer people who know, the better." When Sophie hung up, her hands were trembling, not from nervousness, but from pure rage. Jayden was not only stealing information from the company, but was now trying to convince her to cover up a supposed crime of espionage from her own father. That afternoon, Dr. Tan Wei-xiong came home earlier than usual. Sophie was waiting for him in the living room with a serious expression. "Dad, I need to tell you something important." "Doctor." Tan sat down beside his daughter, immediately noticing her tension. "What is it, my dear?" Sophie told him about the fake call she had made to Jayden, his reaction, and his suggestion to hide everything from Dr. Tan. "Interesting," Dr. Tan murmured, his eyes taking on a hardness Sophie had rarely seen. "Jayden is not only stealing our information, but now he's trying to manipulate you to cover up imaginary crimes." "Dad, I can't take this situation anymore. Finding out my husband is a criminal is destroying me inside." Dr. Tan placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Sophie, I already suspected something was wrong. Jayden has been asking very specific questions about areas of the company that shouldn't interest someone in his position, and our monitoring system has flagged several attempts by him to access files beyond his authorization. What are we going to do?" "Tomorrow is Saturday. Jayden will be at home, right?" "Yes. Perfect. I'll show up here in the morning with an irresistible offer for him. Let's see just how far your husband's ambition goes." On Saturday morning, Jayden was in the garden having coffee when Dr. Tan appeared unexpectedly. Sophie watched from the kitchen window, her heart pounding. "Wei-xiong, what a surprise!" Jayden stood up quickly, clearly nervous about the unexpected visit. "Would you like a coffee?" "Yes, thank you. Actually, Jayden, I came because I have a very special proposal for you." Jayden's eyes lit up. "What kind of proposal?" "I'm considering retiring in the next few years and passing the management of the company to someone in the family. Sophie isn't interested in the business, so I was thinking of preparing you to take my place." Sophie saw Jayden literally tremble with excitement. He tried to hide it, but it was obvious those were the exact words he had dreamed of hearing. Wei Xiong, I don't know what to say. It's a huge honor. But there's a condition, Dr. Tan continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. I need to be absolutely sure I can trust you. For that reason, I'm going to give you access to the company's most confidential documents. Contracts that not even Sophie knows about. Information that could destroy or save our company, depending on how it's used. Jaden could barely hide his excitement. You can count on me completely, Wei Xiong. I swear on my life I'll guard these secrets as if they were my own. Good. On Monday, you'll receive a package with documents that cannot leave the office under any circumstances. Not home, not anywhere. And Jaden? Yes? If I find out these documents have been shared with anyone, even my own daughter, consider our partnership terminated. Understood? Perfectly. You can trust me. Dr. Tan smiled and shook Jaden's hand. I hope so, my boy. I hope so. When Dr. Tan left, Jaden came into the house in a state of total euphoria. Sophie, your dad just offered me the leadership of the company, he shouted, lifting her up and spinning her around the living room. In a few years, I'll be the CEO of Asia Pacific Healthcare Group. Sophie forced a look of joy and surprise. Really? That's wonderful, love. Dad must really trust you a lot. He said he's going to give me access to the most important documents in the company, information that even you don't know about. The way Jaden said those words, with an almost malicious pride, made Sophie's stomach turn. He was clearly feeling superior to her, as if he had finally managed to fool the entire family. I'm so proud of you, Sophie lied, giving him an affectionate kiss, but inside she knew that Jaden had just agreed to participate in his own execution. The confidential documents he would receive on Monday were a trap so perfect that not even the cleverest of criminals could escape. Jaden thought he had won. He thought that soon he would be rich and powerful, free to live his great love with Cheryl at the expense of the family he had betrayed. He had no idea that Monday would be the last day of his life as a free man. Monday arrived, charged with a tension that Sophie could feel in the air. Jaden woke up earlier than usual, took a long shower, and chose his best suit, as if he were preparing for the coronation of his life. During breakfast, he could barely hide his anxiety. Today's the big day, he said, adjusting his tie for the third time. I'm finally getting access to the information that really matters at the company. Sophie watched his every move with a mixture of fascination and pity. How could someone be so blinded by their own greed? A part of her, a small stubborn part that still remembered the man she had met at Noose, almost wanted to warn him about the trap that awaited him. Jaden, she said softly, placing her hand over his on the table. Are you sure this is what you want? All this responsibility? All this pressure? Jaden stopped fiddling with his tie and looked at her, confused. Of course I'm sure. Why are you asking that? It's just, sometimes I wonder if we aren't happier just the way we are. Simple, without complications. Have you ever thought that maybe the life we have now is enough? For a fleeting moment, Sophie saw something different in Jaden's eyes, a hesitation, a shadow of doubt. Perhaps there was still a small human part of him, a part that recognized he was about to cross a line that shouldn't be crossed. But the moment passed quickly. Sophie. Love. Jaden held her hands, his voice taking on the condescending tone she had learned to hate. You don't understand how the business world works. To grow, to secure our future, we need to think big. Your father is offering me a unique opportunity. It would be foolish to waste it. What if it goes wrong? What if… Oh, it won't go wrong, Jaden interrupted, kissing her forehead with a condescension that made her stomach churn. Trust me, I know exactly what I'm doing. As Sophie washed the dishes after breakfast, she felt a tear run down her face. It wasn't a tear of sadness for the betrayal. She had already processed that pain. It was a tear of mourning for the definitive death of the man she had loved, or thought she had loved. The Jaden who gave her little kisses on the forehead and promised to take care of her no longer existed. Perhaps he never had. At 9 a.m., the phone rang. It was Mr. Jeyaratnam. Mrs. Kumar, is everything ready for today? Yes, Mr. Jeyaratnam. Jaden left a little while ago, more excited than a child on Christmas morning. Perfect. My people are already in position. As soon as he tries to leave the company with the fake documents, we'll have all the evidence we need. And then, Mrs. Kumar, your husband will discover that underestimating a smart woman was the biggest mistake of his life. At 10 a.m., Sophie received a call from Rachel. Sophie, we need to talk in person. Now. Rach, what happened? You sound nervous. I'm at the mall near your condo. Can you come here? It's about Jaden. 30 minutes later, Sophie found Rachel sitting in a coffee shop, clearly agitated. Sophie, I didn't know if I should tell you this, but… What is it, Rach? Last Saturday, I was in town when I saw Jayden going into an apartment building. That wouldn't be a big deal, except he was with a dark-haired woman. Sophie felt her heart race. Cheryl, I know about her, Rach. She's his mistress. Rachel's eyes widened. And you didn't do anything? I'm doing it today. Sophie quickly told her best friend about the entire plan she had orchestrated with Mr. Jeyaretnam and her father. Rachel listened in silence, her expression changing from worry to admiration. My God, Sophie, you've turned into a different person. The naive Sophie died on my wedding day, Rach. This is me now. And are you sure this is what you want? To completely destroy Jayden's life? Sophie looked out the coffee shop window, watching normal people living their normal lives, people who hadn't been betrayed on the most important day of their lives, people who hadn't discovered that 5 years of a relationship had been a cruel, calculated lie. Rush, you know what hurts the most? It's not even that he doesn't love me. It's that he thought I was so stupid, so inferior, that he didn't even bother to hide it properly. Jayden never respected me as a person. To him, I was always just an object to be used. Rachel held her friend's hand. And now he's going to find out who I really am. At noon, Sophie received a message from Dr. Tan Wei Xiong. Package delivered. Jayden seems more interested than a kid with a new toy. At 2 p.m., another message. Our bird has tried to photograph confidential documents 3 times. Security system recorded everything. At 4 p.m., the message Sophie was waiting for. He's leaving the building with a briefcase that should have stayed in the safe. It's time. Sophie closed her eyes and took a deep breath. After weeks of planning, the moment had arrived. The phone rang at 5:15 p.m. Mrs. Kumar, it's Mr. Jeyaretnam. We have him. How did it go? Perfectly. Jayden was intercepted in the company car park with confidential documents, 3 USB drives with stolen information, and on top of that, he was on his way to Cheryl Lim's apartment. Our investigator managed to record his conversation with her, where he literally brags about stealing the family's secrets. Sophie sat down slowly on the living room sofa, feeling a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. And now, Mr. Jeyaretnam? Now, the Commercial Affairs Department has been notified. Jayden is being questioned at this moment. With the evidence we have, he could get 5 to 15 years for corporate espionage, fraud, and conspiracy. 15 years. Sophie repeated, still processing the information. Mrs. Kumar, there's something else you need to know. What? Cheryl isn't just his mistress. She works for a competitor of Azure Pacific Healthcare. They were literally selling your family's secrets to your biggest rivals in the market. Sophie closed her eyes. It wasn't just personal betrayal, it was corporate, family, and financial betrayal. Jayden hadn't just played with her heart. He had tried to destroy her father's legacy of decades of hard work. At 6 p.m., Dr. Tan Wei Xiong arrived home. Sophie was in the living room, still trying to process everything that had happened. My dear, he said, sitting beside her. Is it over, Dad? It's over. I still can't believe we did it. Sophie, I need to apologize to you. She looked at him, surprised. Why? For not realizing what kind of man he was sooner, for letting him get so close to our family, for not protecting you. Sophie hugged her father, feeling tears stream down her face. Dad, no one could have predicted this. Jayden fooled all of us. But you were smarter than him. You caught him. We caught him, Dad. Together. That night, Sophie was alone for the first time in months. Jayden was in custody, awaiting the legal proceedings that would change his life forever. Cheryl had also been arrested as an accomplice. Sophie walked through the home she had shared with Jayden, looking at objects that once represented their life together. The wedding photos on the wall, the gifts they had received, the renovation projects they had planned. It all seemed to belong to another life, to another person. Her phone rang. It was Rachel. Sophie, how are you? Strange, Rach. Free, but strange. It's like I've lived in a prison for so long that now I don't know what to do with freedom. And what do you want to do? Sophie looked out the window at the stars in the night sky. For the first time in weeks, she could think of something beyond revenge and justice. I want to live, Rach. I want to discover who I am when I'm not being manipulated, deceived, or underestimated. I want to meet the Sophie who survived all this. And you will. You're so much stronger than you think. When she hung up, Sophie looked at herself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back was different from the naive bride who had discovered the betrayal weeks ago. Her eyes held a determination that wasn't there before, a strength forged in pain and tempered in battle. Jayden had thought he knew her. He had underestimated her intelligence, her ability to plan, her inner strength. He had bet on the Sophie that existed before the betrayal. The Sophie who trusted blindly, who loved without question, who believed in people without checking. That Sophie had died in the gardens of Chijma's Hall. The Sophie who had been born in her place was someone completely different. Someone Jayden could never have imagined existed. And this new Sophie was just beginning to discover what she was capable of. 3 months had passed since Jayden's arrest, and Sophie was still surprised to wake up every morning with a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence, no longer laden with lies and tension, but filled with infinite possibilities. The trial had concluded the previous week, and the sentence was even more severe than Mr. Jeyaratnam had predicted. Jayden received 12 years in prison for corporate espionage, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Cheryl received 8 years as an accomplice. The competitor firm that had tried to buy the secrets of Azure Pacific Healthcare was facing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit that would likely drive it into bankruptcy. Sophie was on the balcony of her new home, a sleek apartment in the city center she had bought with her own money, when Rachel arrived with a bottle of champagne and a radiant smile. "Sophie, did you see the news?" "What news?" "The Women's Enterprise Institute wants to invite you to give talks on how to identify abusive and manipulative relationships." Sophie nearly dropped her coffee cup. "Seriously?" "Completely serious. They said your story has become an example of how a woman can recover from a devastating betrayal and turn pain into strength." In recent months, against all expectations, Sophie's story had become public. Initially, she had tried to keep everything private, but when other similar cases began appearing in the media, she decided to share her experience to help other women in similar situations. "Rach, I still can't believe how much my life has changed. Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life." "You're living your life, Sophie. For the first time in years, you're truly being yourself." Rachel was right. In the last few months, Sophie had discovered aspects of her personality she never knew existed. Her leadership skills, her business acumen, her emotional strength that had been hidden for years under Jayden's subtle manipulation. "By the way," Rachel continued, "how was the meeting with your father yesterday?" Sophie smiled. "Incredible. He offered me a position on the company's board of directors." "Are you going to accept?" "I already did. I'm starting as Director of Human Resources, with a special focus on creating protocols to identify employees who might pose internal security risks." It was ironic, but perfectly fitting. Who better than Sophie to develop systems to prevent other Jaydens from infiltrating family businesses? The intercom buzzed, interrupting their conversation. Sophie answered, surprised to hear an unfamiliar female voice. "Sophie, my name is Melissa. I read about your story in the paper. Could I please talk to you?" Sophie glanced at Rachel, who nodded encouragingly. "Of course. Come on up. Apartment 1204. Minutes later, a woman in her early 30s was sitting in Sophie's living room, her hands trembling as she held a cup of tea. Melissa told a story that was terrifyingly familiar. A charming husband who had approached her after finding out her family owned a prosperous business, years of subtle emotional manipulation, and recent suspicions that he was stealing confidential information from her family's company. "Sophie, I read everything about your case. How did you find the strength to act? How did you know you were doing the right thing?" Sophie looked at Melissa, seeing in her eyes the same fear and confusion she herself had felt months ago. "Melissa, the first thing you need to understand is that it's not your fault. People like our husbands are experts at manipulation. They choose smart, kind women because they know we're less likely to suspect their true intentions. But what if I'm wrong? What if he really loves me? If he really loved you, you wouldn't be here with these doubts, with this fear. True love doesn't create this kind of constant anxiety." Rachel watched Sophie speak to Melissa, impressed by her friend's transformation. The insecure, manipulated woman had become someone capable of offering strength and guidance to others. Sophie spent the next hour helping Melissa devise a plan. She gave her Mr. Jeyaratnam's contact details, explained how to securely document evidence, and most importantly, assured her she was not alone. "Melissa, you have my number. Call me whenever you need to, anytime. Promise?" "I promise. Sophie, thank you. You saved me today." After Melissa left, Rachel looked at Sophie with an expression of motherly pride. "You know you've become a symbol, right?" "A symbol of what?" "That it's possible to rise from the ashes. That a betrayed woman can become stronger than she ever imagined." That night, Sophie was alone in her apartment, organizing the divorce papers, which had finally been finalized. Officially, she was free. Free from Jayden, free from the lies, free from the version of herself that had allowed herself to be diminished for so long. Her phone rang. It was Dr. Tan Wei Xiong. "My dear, did you see today's paper?" "No. Why?" "There's an article about you in the business section. The heiress who became her own heroine. It's worth a read." After hanging up, Sophie found the article online. The journalist had interviewed several people who knew her story, including Mr. Jeyaratnam, some company colleagues, and even employees who had witnessed Jayden's suspicious behavior. The article ended with a sentence that made Sophie's eyes well up with tears. "Sophie Tan has proven that the greatest revenge against those who underestimate us is not destruction, but transformation. She not only survived the betrayal, she flourished beyond anything her tormentors could have imagined." Weeks later, Sophie stood in the main auditorium of the NUS Business School, about to give her first public lecture. The topic was Personal Reconstruction After Relational Trauma, and she had been invited to speak to an audience of over 500 people. Backstage, she felt the same nervousness she had on her wedding day. But this time, the nervousness was different. It wasn't a fear of disappointment or inadequacy. It was the thrill of being about to share something that could genuinely help other people. "Sophie, are you ready?" asked the event organizer. "I am." Sophie walked onto the stage and looked out at the sea of faces before her. Women of all ages, some visibly emotional, others curious, many clearly identifying with her story. "Good morning," she began, her voice firm and clear. "My name is Sophie, and a few months ago, I was a woman who believed her worth depended on being loved by a man who, in reality, despised her." A murmur of identification ran through the audience. "Today, I'm here to tell you that no matter how far you've fallen, no matter how manipulated or diminished you feel, there is a strength inside you that is far greater than anyone who tries to control you." The lecture lasted an hour and a half. Sophie told her full story. From the discovery of the betrayal to the present moment, she spoke of pain, of anger, of the temptation of destructive revenge, and of how she had chosen to channel all that energy into personal growth and constructive justice. "The greatest lesson I learned," she said, concluding her talk, "is that no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Jayden thought he knew me, but he only knew the version of me I had allowed him to see. The real woman, the strong woman, was always here. She just needed to be awakened." The applause was deafening. Sophie saw tears in the eyes of many women in the audience, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of hope, of strength. After the lecture, dozens of people approached Sophie to talk. Each story was different, but the central theme was the same: women discovering they were much stronger than they had imagined. An older woman, about 60 years old, held Sophie's hands and said, "My dear, you've given me the courage to leave a 30-year marriage where I was treated like a piece of furniture. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to start over." That night, Sophie was in her apartment, reflecting on the day. Rachel was with her, helping her respond to the dozens of emails from women who wanted to share their own stories. "Sophie, do you realize the movement you've started?" "What movement?" "Look at these emails. Women from all over the country telling you how your story inspired them to take action in their own lives. You are literally changing lives." Sophie looked out of her apartment window at the illuminated city below. Each light represented a life, a story, a person trying to find their way in the world. "Rach, remember when you asked me if I was sure I wanted to destroy Jayden's life?" "I remember." "Today, I realize it was never about destroying his life. It was about building my own. And what a life you've built, my friend." Sophie smiled, feeling a deep peace she hadn't experienced in years, perhaps had never experienced. Jayden had tried to use her kindness against her, to turn her trust into weakness, her generosity into naivety. But in the end, it was exactly that kindness, that inner strength he had tried to diminish, that became the foundation of her greatest victory. She had not only survived the betrayal, she had grown through it, had become someone even she didn't know she could be. And most importantly, she had discovered that her happiness had never depended on Jayden or anyone else. She had always carried within herself everything she needed to be whole. Sophie Tan had found her own way back home, and this time, she was both the heroine and the savior of her own story.